Welcome to episode 5 of Clone Correct. Now, today I'm 10 years and $377,000 of pension payments into DD214 and Chill, and today we're going to learn how to properly clone everyone's favorite clone to fuck up, the M4 and the M4A1 carbine. After this long intro, I will cover a short history for context as well as major variants, followed by turnkey clones, then parts evolution. For brevity and to appease the YouTube gods, I only covered civilian part alternatives if the civilian version was different than the military part. Finally, we will cover my clones. For cloning purposes, the M4 and the M4A1 carbine are almost interchangeable. And by this, I mean the actual rifle itself, without any sort of accessories or upgrades. The M4 and the M4A1 have been a standard A weapon for over 30 years, easily the longest serving M16 variant in frontline service. Because of the long service life, the story is a lot of branches. As such, in order to keep the story straight, this video will concentrate on the main story of the carbine itself, sticking to things from official Big Army maintenance manuals, modification work orders, and additional authorization lists. We will ignore official and unofficial upgrade or rebuild programs like the SOP Mod program, Navy Mark 18 series, Air Force Gal 5s, and similar. Much of my information comes from having been an end user of the M4A1 and M4 in the Army from 1995 to 2010, so your experience may differ. The M4 and M4A1 was an officially adopted rifle or carbine, so the parts configuration is fixed, although it did go through changes. Because it was adopted, the parts variations or parts changes were officially documented and as such easy to track. Now, there are a lot of minute changes, a lot of marking changes, how things were made, and so on and so forth, that were not tracked and are only really matter to cloners, so we're going to do our best to explain those as well. Prior to about 2001, the M4 and the M4A1 were the same parts configuration, with the exception of the fire control. The M4, originally intended for conventional troops, had burst fire control. The M4A1, originally intended for special operations, had auto fire control. The M4A1 was an officially adopted carbine, so units that had missed out on commercial off-the-shelf carbines like the 727 were now issued the new M4A1. The story of the M4 really begins with the XM4 program from the 80s, which we talked about in the last video, the 727 video. The XM4 morphed into the M4, carrying with it the fixed carry handle. The flat-top version, Colt first showed this off in 1992, and it was offered for commercial and export sales under the M4 name, which was actually a Colt trademark or brand name. The U.S. military adopted the M4 and M4A1 in 1994, with some of the early manuals even being dated 1993. Some of these early manuals from 93 and 94 show the M4 as having a fixed carry handle, with the 1994 manual showing the M4A1 as having a detachable carry handle. If fixed carry handle carbines were actually delivered is up to debate. The U.S. military adopted the Stanag rail in 1995, and the 1995 repair manual already shows both the M4 and M4A1 as having detachable carry handles. In 1995, the first real deliveries of the M4 and the M4A1 occurred, with the first units being delivered were M4A1s being delivered to special operations. Deliveries to conventional units like the 82nd Airborne Division happened shortly afterwards. From talking with fellow members of the E4 Mafia on Fort Bragg at the time and observations at big Army exercises like Bright Star, those initial deliveries of M4s were issued to officers and NCOs in a manner similar to the old XM177 from the Vietnam era. Carbines delivered from 1995 to 2001, 2002 were very distinct from later rifles. As shipped from the factory, They had A2 shaped lowers, the fat A2 pistol grip, the old school N1 stock, detachable carry handle. The upper had CAF forge code markings, as well as no T marks. Fat M4 handguards. The barrel was the same, regardless of whether or not it was an M4 or M4A1. And then the front sling attachment point was the old style, which will allow mounting on A2 weight barrels and A1 weight barrels. There were accessories like the RIS and the RAS. The RAS was already in the Big Army Maintenance Manual from 1998. However, as shipped from the factory, this is how the rifles were shipped. Now, if you're wondering why the carry handle is moved one notch to the rear, in those early days with M12 small arms racks in the arms room, the quick and easy way to be able to use the same M16 racks was to move the carry handle back one notch, and then it would fit in the standard rack. Now, there was a work order to cut the rack and all that sort of stuff, but then the rack would be dedicated to an M4 and couldn't be used for anything else later. In 2001, there was a major parts change and really the start of a new era. The official configuration of the M4A1 went from the standard M4 barrel to the new M4A1 heavy barrel. How did that work? Well, in early 2001, my unit received 3 huge pallet-sized boxes of brand new M4A1s fitted with a heavy barrel. These were packed in individual boxes that were labeled RO920HB, and these new carbines replaced all of the 1995 era M4A1s in the line companies. The Pogues in the support company, like myself, we kept our 1995 era M4A1s. The new M4A1s were in the Whiskey 338000 serial number range. They're more or less the same as the old ones: A2 shaped lowers, N1 stocks, CAF uppers without T marks, standard Selector. They were shipped as bare rifles with fat handguards and carry handles, and then the battalion armorer had to change everything over. The old M4A1s from the line companies were turned in. Shortly afterwards, with the global war on terror in full swing, M4 and M4A1 production expanded with a lot of subtle changes. Colt, they changed from Colt's manufacturing to Colt's defense. Whether or not there's some sort of correlation with them changing parts at that same time, I don't know, but that seems like a possibility. So by now, Anniston Army Depot was also pumping out rebuilds. Those 1995 era M4A1s that had been turned in, well, they filtered back. They were refinished and had been upgraded with the new M4A1 heavy barrel. In late 2006, Big Army decreed that the new official configuration of the M4 and M4A1 would be with the RAS system handguards and Picatinny designed backup iron sights. All carbines would be upgraded to this new configuration, regardless of whoever they were issued to, and new carbines would be delivered from the factory in this configuration. The Air Force had already done this for several years. In 2009, the U.S. military acquired the rights to the M4 series carbine. This allowed other companies like FN and Remington to bid on and win contracts, with FN ultimately being the only company to actually deliver, starting in 2014. That same year, Big Army adopted the M4A1 carbine as the be-all, end-all for the M16 series, replacing all M16A2s, A4s, and any remaining M4s in U.S. Army service. The M4A1 had largely superseded the M4 in Big Army a couple years prior, with existing M4s being converted to M4A1 standard. This started in 2011, really hit full speed in 2014. These conversions happened at both Anniston Army Depot as well as local TACOM conversions. So rather than ship the rifles back to Anniston, teams came to Big Army posts and converted them there. The U.S. Marine Corps, who had already been using M4 type rifles already, formally adopted the M4A1 in 2015 to replace their remaining M16A4s as well. As of this recording, the SIG M7 is slated to be the M4 series replacement. Now, time will tell if this will actually come to fruition, or it'll end up like all the other failed attempts at replacing the M16 series. So, like the M16A2 in one of the previous videos, there are three major carbines that can be cloned. You have the Colt M4/M4A1, the FN M4/M4A1, and Anniston Army Depot rebuilds. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, there is the Colt pre-2001-2002 pre-GWAT M4/M4A1, GWAT era Big Army M4s, and Colt post-2014 Big Army M4 to M4A1 TACOM conversions. There is also the modern laser engraved Colt M4A1s. Generally, and there are exceptions to every rule, SOF got their fill of M4A1s prior to the lower shape changeover in 2002, although there were some deliveries after that when the units expanded. Most Big Army units that originally rated carbines got their fill with Colt M4s in the late 90s and 2000s, with ANAD rebuilds filling in gaps during this time. TACOM conversions started changing M4s to M4A1s in the mid-2010s. FN M4s, later M4A1s, and the new engraved Colt M4A1s have generally gone to units or services that were late in carbine adoption or fielding, like the U.S. Marine Corps, the Air Force, or the 69th Laundry and Bath Battalion of the U.S. Army Reserves. Are there any turnkey clones? Of course. M4 clones, or M4geries as they used to be called, seem to be half the civilian AR-15 market the last 20 plus years since the assault weapon ban expired. So, in order to keep this video short, we're only going to talk about clones from the two primary contractors, Colt and FN. Colt has sold various M4 clones for about 25 years. Since this subject in itself is a 30-minute video, we will cover the beginning and the end. About the turn of the century, Colt introduced the LE6920 Colt law enforcement carbine for the law enforcement market. A few years later, they started producing the Match Target M4 line, or the MT6400 series. Today, Colt sells the carbine model CR6920, as well as the LE6920 SOCOM to the civilian market. The LE6920 SOCOM is virtually identical to M4A1s delivered to the US military today, all the way down to the markings. The only thing that could really be improved is the flash hider. The LE6920 uses a military M4A1 14.5-inch barrel with an oddball extended flash hider to bring the barrel length over 16 inches so that the rifle remains Title I. It's not bad, but not great either. Otherwise, the rifle is 99% of the way there and hard to improve upon. FN, the story goes, cannot use its government-provided license to sell ARs to the civilian market. So they have a separate company that sells ARs to the civilian market, assembling the same commercial parts as the 10,000 other AR assemblers, just with an FN trademark. They do sell an M4 collector model. However, unlike Colt, none of the parts appear to be the same parts as their military contract guns. To add insult to injury, their website shows photos of their military carbines on the civilian collector model page. This rifle uses a 14.7-inch barrel with pin and welded flash hider. While a nice rifle, for a collector model at collector prices, I would expect more. So, if that doesn't do it for you, then you have to build it. So, what parts go with what? With production and service starting over 30 years ago, There have been more than a few parts changes, both intentional part updates as well as subtle production changes that only a few notice and nobody ever documents. So, while I will do my best with information sourced from personal observations, as well as verified information gleaned from official documentation, it is possible that I have errors. If you do have something to add to the discussion, please let me know down in the comments. Buttstock! In order to keep this section streamlined, I'm only going to cover standard stocks as well as stocks adopted by Big Army as additional authorization list items. The initial buttstock used was the Colt polymer carbine stock, commonly called the N1 stock. The waffle stock replaced this. The NSN was established in 1998 and it first appeared in military repair manuals that year, but was vaporware until about 2002. It replaced the N1 stock on both new rifles as well as replacement parts. Early versions were unmarked, like this. During the 2010s, P&S Products received contracts to supply M4 waffle stocks to the military as replacement parts. They also became the OEM manufacturer for Colt as well as FN and numerous civilian companies. These stocks were simply marked with a cage code. Sometimes just P&S, sometimes one cage code for P&S, others for Colt. In an example of life imitating art, these USGI stocks have an empty circular spot as they seem to use the same molds used to produce waffle stocks with logos for civilian companies. All the photos I could find, stocks on FN produced carbines are the empty disc variety, marked with their cage code. However, they appear to be made by P&S or its successor. In 2022, P&S was bought out or reformed into a new company, Prudent American Technologies. So new stocks, both replacement part and OEM, are now marked with their cage code. There are some reports of a new version of the waffle stock with a QD swivel within the last few years. I'm not sure if this is a full, purposeful change or an oddball replacement part that slipped through the system. Almost since the beginning of the M4 series, there has been alternate stocks available. The first such stock is the SupMod stock, inspired by the Colt ACR carbine stock. Early versions were made for Crane in small numbers, before being standardized about 2002-2003, with LMT getting the contract to produce it in larger numbers for SOCOM-wide issue. A new contract for the stock was awarded to a new company, B5 Industries, about 2009-2010. As a result, Big Army added it to the additional authorization list for the M4 series, meaning that conventional Army users could order it. The same stock is officially authorized for the Marine Corps as well. In 2023, Big Army added some more options to the list. They include the Black Hogue stock, as well as tan and black options from B5 and Magpul. As mentioned earlier, I only covered stocks that I could find official documentation for. There are a slew of other stocks that have seen service and even awarded NSNs, so always consult photographs. I should note that outside of SOF, few commanders are going to sign off on spending money on trivial things like fancy rifle stocks for replacement parts when the waffle stocks are cheaper if not free. Cloning these today depends on how big of a stickler you are. Almost everything is still in production from an original supplier. The only exception is the N1 stock, and there are alternatives that are virtually indistinguishable. We've covered these ad nauseum in earlier videos. If you are the type of guy that wakes up in a panic because of small details, the waffle stock, the design itself hasn't changed. However, there are subtle differences between the original Colt produced stocks and later openly subcontracted stocks. FN waffle stocks The military version wasn't ever released to the civilian market. For the older stocks and the military stocks, you have to look for either quote unquote surplus or the secondary market. The original Colt stocks can even still be found new old stock, although they aren't cheap. FN has sold the stocks made with their trademark on the civilian market, but these didn't see military use. It's a similar story with the SOPMOD stock. The Crane, LMT, and B5 stocks are the same design, just subtle differences in texture, latch, and so forth. Like the waffle stock, the time period you are trying to clone will dictate which one to use. Since Big Army additional authorization list stocks are the only ones covered in this video, well, the B5 will work for that. Buffer tubes. One of the improvements introduced with the adoption of the M4/M4A1 was a 4-position receiver extension. This has remained unchanged throughout the life of the M4 series. Colt does sell a 6-position extension called the Mark 18 receiver extension, but I cannot find any evidence of use in any official military manuals. Today, 4-position mil-spec receiver extensions can be found everywhere. Personally, I have learned the hard way that they are not all the same, solidifying my Colt Kool-Aid habit. Castle nut. Like the buffer tube, with the adoption of the M4 series came a new style castle nut. It was the only type used. End plate. The same Car 15 style end plate has been unchanged since the XM177 in 1965. The CQD rear sling mount is listed in the -10 operator manual as being an authorized item for quote-unquote Navy only. The NSN listed was introduced in 2011. Some commercial end plates with sling loops have also been used, but they don't appear to have any sort of official documentation. Castle nut staking. A mil-spec requirement, this is one of those things that keeps me up at night. And they are all different. Colt staking is more squarish in appearance. I've never been able to find a way to replicate it in my garage. One of the reasons I prefer to build from a Colt donor rifle. Specialized Armament does offer staking as a service, supposedly on factory tooling. And recently, I tried having my receiver extension staked by John Thomas at Retro Arms Works, and the work came out spectacular. FN I haven't seen in person. However, from photos, the staking appears to have been done with a round center punch, which is easy enough to replicate yourself. Rebuilds and similar, the traditional method used during castle nut staking is also a center punch. Always consult photos. Pistol grip. Colt initially used the fat A2 style grip on M4/M4A1 production until sometime in the early 2000s when they changed to the new style currently used today. How do you tell the difference between the early and late styles? Well, on the newer version, the finger grooves have a noticeable step. On the older versions, the shaft and the base have a smooth transition, almost like they're one piece. The new style, it's more pronounced. It almost looks like the shaft was added to the base after the fact. He said shaft. FN deliveries seem to have happened after the modern, smaller, generic pistol grips arrived on the scene. And I am sure that there are generic, made by blind people replacements in the system as well. ANAD rebuilds, as long as it was in the system, anything goes. Lower receiver. Almost anything goes, but it depends on the time period and the variant you are cloning. The lower receiver choice is one of those parts that takes your clone from just as good to clone correct. We're going to talk about the 4 major variations. Colt factory original carbines, FN factory original carbines, ANAD rebuild carbines, then finally take home M4 to M4A1 conversions. Colt started production using the old A2 style lower receiver, and continued until about 2002 when they switched to the new style, which they continue to use to this day. The overall markings haven't changed. However, in 2002, Colt moved from the Colt's manufacturing on lowers to Colt's defense on lowers. This was about the same time as the change in lower shape for defense contracts. There were some new style lowers with manufacturing. Colt switched from roll marking with metal dies to laser engraving in late 2019. This was both M4A1 production and M4 production. FN started to make M4s and M4A1s under contract about 2014, with the contract awarded in 2013. As the military was going all in on the M4A1 about this time, the vast majority were M4A1s. Every photo of a factory-made FN M4/M4A1 that I've seen shows the new lower style forging. These forgings are supposedly made by Ciro Forge. FN seems to have gone through different styles of engraving. Based on the serial number range, the early versions used the same FN football that was used on the M16 series. This later changed to a more stylized FN logo. Factory M4/M4A1 rifles, the serial number starts with a Y or a Yankee. Like the M16A2 before it, Anniston Army Depot took old M16 series lower receivers and rebuilt them into M4s and M4A1s using spare parts. I saw my first one in the mid to early 2000s when M4 and M4A1 production hit overdrive as a result of the GWAT, but it's possible they were available before that. For these, we have M16A1 lowers, which are actually a rarity. We have M16A2 lowers rebuilt as both M4s and M4A1s. And we have M4s rebuilt as M4A1s. Finally, we have receivers that were purchased by the US military as loose spare parts, similar to the Balamoy manufacturing lowers of the M16A2 era. FN seems to be the primary contractor on these, with contracts actually predating FN M4 or M4A1 production. The serial number is in the M16A4 range, starting with a 1. The UID label on the magazine well gives these away as it shows the original part number. This one shows 9349102, which is the strip lower for the M16A2. While this one shows 939015, which is the stripped M4 lower. This one has both the lower part number in conjunction with the new part number of 129-72700, which is M4A1 carbine. The markings on the ANAD rebuilds are different than the locally done Product Improvement Program conversions by TACOM. For these, the old markings are milled out and new markings stamped in the depressions. In the mid-2010s, Big Army decided that all M4s would be converted to M4A1 standard. Rather than ship everything to Anniston, teams were sent to Army posts to convert the weapons there. Besides the barrels being replaced, the rifles were remarked. Rather than a mill and stamps like the Anniston conversions, these were remarked with a laser. In a further bit of irony, sometimes these TACOM conversion markings were applied to weapons that had already received ANAD markings, like this one. Cloning the lower today is hit or miss. For a Colt rifle, obviously if you're cloning a pre-2002 rifle, the only source is to find a period Colt receiver. Luckily, used law enforcement Colt AR-15A3 tactical carbine model 6721s and sometimes even law enforcement 6920s can be found for a reasonable cost. You can also use one of the obscure lowers from the 90s that I talked about in detail in the M16A2 video. The Colt lower method is exactly what I do. I normally start with a complete used carbine, as you get the factory stake castle nut, period upper, and other bits that you don't have to hunt down or get in a bidding war on. Change out the barrel, and bam, you're done. Colt lowers from the time period do have a few minor problems. Many have non-captive pivot pins and a sear block which prevents the use of a standard bolt carrier. All have oversized trigger pins and no selector stops. For me, though, I am willing to put up with those annoyances in order to get the proper lower shape, color, and the same overall feel of a period rifle. Remember, the hard 5 that never says no is always better than the perfect 10 who won't even talk to you. 2002 to 2019 Colts, same story. Civilian 6920s are one of the most common Colt rifles sold today. Markings will vary depending on when it was made. For me, incorrect markings are one of those necessary evils of cloning. The 2019 to present Colt is essentially producing the 99% solution, so why bother with anything else? FN factory original carbines? Sadly, there isn't a good solution. Most of the FN military collector lowers are using the older style forging that FN hasn't used on military contract M4s or M4A1s. The FN military contract guns use the new style forging, commonly referred to as being from Cerro Forge. FN has put out FN 15s and even a limited number of military collector rifles with a similar lower. However, while the back end is a good match, the magazine fence area is not. The only real solution is some machine work or follow a similar path of welding that many retro collectors use. ANAD rebuilds, you can use a 90s Colt lower or a modern generic lower. Many FN M16A2 lowers were used, so it seems like the perfect use for the modern FN military collector lowers. The FN military collector lowers are a decent match for the FN M16A2 era lowers. However, they are not a good match for the military contract replacement part lowers from the 2010s onwards. Take home M4 to M4A1 conversions, you were on your own here. International Milco makes a good generic M4 lower with Colt style roll marks. A decent laser engraver could replicate the original PIP laser markings. Selector. Colt used the same selector from the A2 series on carbines until the late 2000s when it was replaced with the new style. The M4A1 Ambi Selector was approved in 2010. As best as I can tell from photos, FN used the Ambi Selector on both the M4 and the M4A1. Cloning these today is a mixed bag. Most semi-auto selectors sold today are some new oddball style with a longer hot dog, just like your dad likes. Most semi-auto selectors also lack the tick mark on the right side. Correct selectors have been made in the past, but finding them today is another story. International Milco sells lower parts kits with clone correct selectors in both early and late styles. However, they don't seem to be available separately. For the Ambi selector, this isn't an issue. Colt sells a semi-selector that is clone correct, as does FN. Both are probably made by the same subcontractor. Most of the military replacement parts used to upgrade older rifles were from some oddball third-party company anyway, so buying a selector from another source is just as correct. The US Marine Corps, of course, had another official alternative. Actuator, gun safety, ambidextrous. This is the Knight's Armament, part number 20067, ambidextrous selector, NSN created in 2006. I am not a CAC expert, but as best as I can tell, part number 25776 was the semi-auto version, and that is out of production. Magazine release, also unchanged since the 1960s, with no official alternatives by the Army. The US Marines, of course, do have an alternative. Magazine release, ambidextrous. This is the Norgon LLC Ambi-Catch, part number M40051M. The NSN, also created in 2006. Upper receiver. The design itself has only changed once. No T marks versus T marks. Otherwise, the only changes have been superficial marking differences from the different contractors and forging houses. These markings have never been documented. From first-hand experience as a clone nerd for over 30 years, I do have a rough timeline. The initial upper receivers used by Colt were marked CAF and didn't have T marks. These uppers, in various shades of gray, started to be used in 1995 and faded away by 2002. Starting about 2002, new forge codes started to be used. The first new forge code used was raised C with splintered A. These also lacked T marks. Raised C with cardinal forging mark and with T marks followed. T marks being standard after this point, which was 2002 to 2003-ish. Others seen shortly afterwards were raised C with square, raised C with keyhole, with the most common being Colt Canada Dymaco DevTech marking with both splintered A and the same but with keyhole. As the 2000s were Colt's heyday with M4 series production, a lot of crazy stuff was happening, so I'm sure that there's some that I missed, but these are the most common. In the late 2000s, uppers with stamped C's started to show up, both with square and keyhole. The keyhole uppers became the most dominant forge code used by Colt until late 2017, when Colt started to mark uppers with a cage code, if they mark them at all. The cage code marked uppers have both keyhole and square forge codes, which are the most common. FN has used a few over the years. As I don't have any first-hand experience with them, and FN doesn't sell military contract parts to the civilian market, all of my information is gleaned from internet research. As such, I might be missing a few. Some of the markings used: square with stamped F. These seem to be the most common earlier in production. Square with engraved C and FN's cage code. Keyhole with stamped F. Square with engraved cage code and A. Splintered A with raised F. Splintered A with raised F, an engraved C, and a cage code. Splintered A with raised C and raised cage code. These seem to be the most common in later production. Then we have this oddball example, which has a raised C and splintered A, but came in a bag with FN's cage code. And some without any FN markings, both keyhole and splintered A. Throughout M4 series production, the US military has purchased replacement upper receivers. These replacement upper receivers have been used to repair damaged rifles, by Anniston Army Depot to build new carbines, and at lower organizational levels to assemble new upper receiver groups. Colt and FN have supplied uppers, and in the last 10 years or so, replacement uppers have also come from Demco, MSI, and General Manufacturing. Because Colt and FN have at times produced sterile upper receivers without their usual markings, identifying third-party replacement uppers in service can be difficult. There are, however, a couple of exceptions. Mueller dog-bone marked uppers are a recent replacement type produced by Demco, with DS Arms of FAL fame being a subsidiary of Demco. Uppers marked with MSI's cage code are another identifiable example. Charging handle. The basic charging handle has remained unchanged since 1963 and 64. However, starting in 2017-2018, the US military started to enforce an earlier mil-spec requirement, which required charging handles to be marked with the manufacturer's cage code. Besides Colt, and FN, there have been a slew of replacements from third parties. The two main suppliers of the last 6 years or so have been Demco Group and Precision Grinding and Manufacturing Corporation, which is also known as PGM Corporation. Charging handles with the cage code for Sigma Manufacturing Industries have also appeared. Their contract was over 10 years ago. Besides the standard charging handle, the U.S. Marines list the PRI M84 charging handle, part number 05 0031, in their Armorer's Manual. The NSN for that was established in 2006. The Marines also authorized the use of Tactical Latch Charging Handle, which is the Badger Ordnance Tactical Latch, part number 249-02. The NSN for that was established in 2004. Bolt Carrier Group and Bolt. I am going to gloss over this, as much of this is transparent to cloners. The Bolt Carrier Group itself has overall been unchanged since the 1960s, with the exception of some small parts like the extractor spring in the M4 series. Colt and FN have provided spare parts to the US military, with Colt still being the main current contractor. Other vendors like Toolcraft and AO Precision have provided them in the past, as well as oddball vendors. Colt bolt carriers are marked with a C. They still are, even in the cage code era, though the style itself has changed over the years. Dymaco marked carriers were also used in the 2000s. FN bolt carriers are marked with various forms of F. Toolcraft bolt carriers are marked with their cage code. The M4 series is notorious for cracking bolts, so replacements abound. Rear sight. Again, for brevity, only sights in the official manuals. Originally, the standard for the M4 M4A1, be it a Colt or ENIAD rebuild, was the detachable carry handle. In late 2006, the carry handle was deleted from the official configuration by the Army, with the Air Force doing it much earlier. In classic military style, after adopting a flat-top carbine in 1994 and the widespread issue of optics in 97 onward, the US military system didn't standardize a backup iron sight until 2001. SOF had a few solutions before that, but they're outside the scope of this video and might be covered later. The Picatinny-designed ModTech backup iron sight was chosen. Initially, it was issued as a replacement part. Modification Work Order 9-1005-319-20-1, dated November 30th, 2006, put out by Big Army, decreed that the ModTech would be part of the official configuration of the M4 series, with all new carbines being shipped from the factory with one. The Air Force had already done that for most of the decade already. This standard continues today. The Marines, it's a little complicated. Finding definitive documentation from the Marine Corps is much harder, as almost nothing is open source. As best as I can tell from the MAR admin letters, which are open source, there are at least 4 different backup iron sights that are approved for use. The ModTech, or Machining Technologies backup iron sight, that the Army and Air Force use. The Knights Armament 300-meter backup iron sight, part number 97082, which is the same backup iron sight from the SOPMod kit. The original Knights 200 to 600 meter backup iron sight, part number 98474. The NSN for these was established in 2002. The Knights Micro 2 to 600 meter backup iron sight, part number 25650-1. The NSN for these was established in 2010. These are marked USMC. Barrel. Other than the introduction of the M4A1 heavy barrel, there have been no external design changes. The original barrel used on the commercial M4A1s and the first few hundred USGI M4A1s was the barrel from the 777 or the 727. Not sure which, as the only photos are low-res affairs. This didn't last long and is how we ended up with the flat top front sight base, which is 0.040 inches higher than the A2 front sight base. After that, the standard M4 barrel was used. About 2001, the M4A1 barrel standard was changed to the new HB or heavy barrel. This same barrel profile is still used today. The earlier standard barrel remained in use and was standard on all new M4s delivered. Of course, when the M4s were upgraded to M4A1s, they received new barrels. Colt, the original primary contractor, marked their barrels like this originally. They were also dated like this. Sometime around 2015-2016, they started to be marked with a cage code instead of the C. FN, of course, followed the same designs. FN barrels are simply marked with their cage code. FN military barrels are not sold to the civilian market, so finding any photographs of any loose ones proved to be difficult. Both FN and Colt have or had contracts for replacement barrels. Smaller companies also had contracts. Capco, which was recently rebranded as Valor, made contract replacement barrels in both M4 and M4A1 designs. These are cage code marked 04099, with Capco receiving their first contract in 2020. Many Machine Company, also known as MMC, also made M4A1 barrels as replacement parts. Their contract started in 2015. Handguard. In order to not make this a 6-hour long video, we will only cover handguards listed in official Army TMs and other official documentation. The original standard handguard with the M4, M4A1 was the fat double heat shielded handguards developed as part of the XM4 program. These continued to be the standard handguard until late 2006, when the Army came out with the modification work order, which changed the standard configuration to the M4 RAS with forward grip. The M4 RAS, originally made by Knights, not to be confused with the M4 RIS from the SOPMOD kit. It was standardized in 1997 with the NSN established in 1998. It appeared in the 23&P maintenance manual from that year as well. Originally, the M4 RAS was issued as a separate system and would be retrofitted at the unit level. The RIS and the RAS are intertwined and easily confused, so I will touch on both. There are subtle differences in how the T-marks are done, but the biggest, I can see it from space, once you know what to look for, difference is that the screw for the mounting bolt is in the front on the RIS and in the rear for the RAS. The RAS largely replaced the RIS, even in units that rated SOPMOD. The most notable exception is the Navy. And even they have largely sold out to the RAS. P&S became a new contractor for the RAS in 2007. They had the contract for the complete assembly as well as individual components. By now, the official Big Army configuration of the M4 and M4A1 was with the M4 RAS, with new carbines being shipped from the factory with one. P&S became the OEM supplier to Colt and later to FN. As mentioned earlier, P&S products turned into Prudent American Technologies, or PAT, in 2022. The Knights RAS systems are dated, along with Knights address. Knights moved from Vero Beach to Titusville about 2004. The military P&S RAS is marked with the company name and or cage code only. PAT made products are marked with a cage code only. New M4 series carbines from FN have included M4 RAS systems simply marked with their cage code. Presumably, these are subcontracted by P&S or PAT. Originally, the M4 RAS was procured as a complete system, which included both the upper and lower handguard, vertical foregrip, and rail covers. As all new carbines are equipped with M4 RAS systems from the factory, The military has moved towards acquiring individual components instead. The loose M4 RAS upper handguard has been filled by Knights, with the bulk of them made by P&S and its successor company, Prudent American Technologies, aka PAT. Contracts for the lower handguard have been filled by Knights, P&S/PAT, Capco at some point in time, probably in the 2010s, B&H Machine Works in the mid-2010s, and NMC at some point in time. The rail covers is a similar story. Originally only made by Knights, markings on the Knights-made covers will vary. Later, P&S Products received contracts for them. They are marked with P&S Products plus their cage code. PAT picked these contracts up. Otis Products of cleaning kit fame also had a contract about 2017-2018 for rail covers. Theirs are marked with Otis Products and their cage code. There are also FN cage code marked covers. Presumably, these are shipped as BII with FN M4s and M4A1s. Other companies like A. Wiley and AM Aerostructures have had contracts. I cannot find any other information, so it's plausible these parts were subcontracted to someone else, or they were simply lost in the sea of P&S Products, who has had the bulk of the contracts. Four grips have been procured from Knights Armament, and like the covers, there are marking variations. P&S/PAT has provided the bulk of them for the military. There are also grips floating around with FN's cage code. Presumably, these are BII with their factory-produced carbines. More recently, Big Army has added the Knights Vertical Pistol Grip, TAN, to the additional authorization list. Part number 97098-1. The open source contract info that I can find, the US military has bought a whopping 191. Since this is all handguard related, we're going to go through some of the official handguarded related accessories listed in Big Army documentation. We have the famous grip pod, which is listed as bipod rifle, NSN 10050156384451. This is part number GPS02. The NSN was established in 2008. The Marines also list this as an authorized accessory. The nickelback of accessories, where everyone says that it sucks, but can't explain why. A jack of all trades, master of none, that is prone to breakage? Does it cause bad shooting habits? Same arguments dudes have been using since the M1 Garand? Or maybe dudes are uncomfortable with grabbing something so big and hard when they're used to the smaller CAC-style grip. You decide, but I bet your mom likes it. The other entry in this category, we have another bipod rifle. This one being the squad-designated marksman bipod. NSN 10050156300152, which was also created in 2008. A GG&G product, this one being part number GGG1125. Recently, Big Army added 2 Picatinny sling adapters to the additional authorization list. The first is quick release sling swivel attachment rail mounted. The part number listed on contracts is Daniel Defense 03-021-10214. Daniel Defense doesn't sell that to the civilian market. It does, however, sell part number 30029 to the civilian market, which is the 10214 and a QD sling swivel in a set. The second is quick release sling swivel attachment rail mounted. The part number for this is AG0675, sold by Armageddon Gear. However, that part is not listed on their website, nor any retailers that I could find. Appearance-wise, it looks almost identical to the VTAC low-profile sling mount, just without the VTAC logo. Finally, we have a flashlight adapter, bracket mounting, NSN 534001485116. This comes up as the Tactical and Rescue Gear, part number 99C-1071. NSN is from 2001. This is simply a flashlight ring that will adjust to whatever non-weapon flashlight you actually have. Beats tape. Front sight base. With the exception of the first few hundred with A2 carbine barrels, the design of the front sight base itself has not changed. The front sight base in the military is not available as a separate component and is integral to the barrel itself. Colt, the markings on the M4 front sight base has changed over the years. Originally, they were marked with an F to differentiate between barrels meant for A2 carbines and flat-top M4s. That F faded away about 2017-2018. The actual forge code used will vary as well. Not sure if there's a pattern to it, or if it's just whatever contractor had parts that day. If someone complains about that on your clone, drive to their house and punch them in the face. FN front sight bases, they are marked F. I don't have enough data to really give a full history. The forge codes that FN uses seem to be a letter jumble. The MMC contract barrels are F marked, but on the opposite side. Capco front sight bases are not F marked. Both the Capco and MMC barrels seem to use the B forge code. Sling swivel. The early style of sling swivel was used until about 2001 when the new style appeared. The old and new style all share the same components with the exception of the clamp itself. The NSN for that was established in April 2000, so give that part a year or two to have taken hold. Flash hider. Again, sticking to official Big Army modifications, the A2 flash hider is the only flash hider used. For the Marines, the Knight's NT4 suppressor and resulting flash hider is authorized. Peel washer versus crush washer. The NSN for the crush washer was established on 20 June 2000, so figure 2001-2002 was the changeover. Alright dudes, you made it. I've done a few clones over the years. The M4A1s that I first saw in 1995 were one of the rifles that kind of inspired me to go down the clone path 30 years ago. So this first one, I cloned my issued rifle that I was issued from 1998 to 2007, which was a 1995 Arid M4A1. Now for this one, I got lucky. I found a complete M4/M4A1 upper half, which had a 1995 barrel date. And then, of course, so it had the proper CAF forge codes, as well as the early sling swivel. I mated this with a late 90s Colt AR-15A3 6721 lower half that had the proper lower shape, factory staked receiver extension, and one stock and A2 pistol grip. This isn't the first of these lowers that I've used. This one I was lucky and found one that actually was drilled for a front normal pivot pin and had no sear block. Now my carbine went through several iterations over the course of those 9 years, but this was kind of the most practical iteration, so that's the accessories that I copied. For this one, I have the Knight's 300 meter backup iron sight from the SOPMOD kit. This is an Aimpoint Comp M series, some sort of civilian version, which I dressed up with M68 accessories to replicate the M68 that I was issued in the early 2000s. The Handguard is the Knight's RAS. And then, of course, the vertical foregrip. The sling is actually the SOPMOD sling that I was issued in the early 2000s, that at the time I didn't really care for because it came undone very easily. But I was able to get a Knight's QD sling mount for the stock, and I think that fixed a lot of the issues I was having, so we're going to try it out for now. The flash hider is a Knight's NT4 flash hider, and then there's a little bit of a spacer, and then it's pin and welded so that the rifle remains Title I. This second one is kind of a work in progress, not really sure what to do with it. Originally, I wanted to replicate my issued M4 that I was issued in LURS from 2007 to 2010. That one was an M203 host. And while I finally found an LMT M203 receiver for a reasonable cost, I realized I didn't really have a good place to shoot M203 chalk rounds without leaving public land a mess, and I didn't want to be a dirtbag. So I got rid of that and kind of turned it into a standard Big Army M4. So the lower receiver is actually a International Milco lower receiver, and in a low friends and high places kind of deal, he was nice enough to give me a custom serial number which matched my issued rifle. The upper receiver is also a factory Colt top half, and this one has a barrel date of 2005, which was the same barrel date as my issued rifle, the same forge code as my issued rifle, and then the stock itself may or may not be the stock for my issued rifle. The rear sling attachment is G, G, and G. Now, as a 203 gunner, I had a PSQ 18 here, a PQ 2 here, so there was really nowhere to put a sling other than maybe a single point. So I found this little adapter locally off post, and this ended up being the perfect solution. They have the Mawtech backup iron sight, Aimpoint Comp M4S, and then of course Knight's or somebody else's RAS system. This is registered as an SBR, so I didn't need to pin and weld the flash hider. Alright dudes, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe and all that shit that I'm supposed to say right now. And then join us next time where we talk about another clone. This is going to be our last long form video where we discuss all these little tiny minute details. The next few videos are going to expand on this knowledge where we delve into some of the oddball modifications of the M4A1. Till next time, dudes.